Scott Aukerman, tell us, what is Comedy Bang Bang?
Well, Comedy Bang Bang is a talk show, but it's not really a talk show. It's more of a sketch show that's kind of wearing a Halloween costume as a talk show. It's ostensibly a talk show where I'm a host and, I have a band leader and we have celebrity guests sitting down on the couch. But it goes off in really strange directions where sometimes the guests aren't real. They're comedians playing fake people. And we do fake movie trailers, and there's always a strange narrative storyline running through each episode. For instance, in one episode, I have created a sort of virtual reality app that will help me tell jokes, and it decides to take over the world, much like the Terminator. So it's kind of a show where anything can happen, but it's in the guise of a talk show.
How do you approach putting together an episode of Comedy Bang Bang?
We when we first started, we just kind of wrote a whole bunch of ideas and threw them against the wall and just tried to figure it out. Now that we're in our 5th season, we sort of have it figured out. We usually start with the narrative structure that the episode is based upon. So myself and the writers will sit down, and this season we did 20 episodes, and we want to figure out 20 episodes that are really diverse from each other. One thing about our shows is that we're proud of is we never do an idea twice. So when we're putting together a whole season, it really is a discussion of, well, what haven't we done? We haven't, last season we did an episode that was all shot in one take, which is kind of something that we do a lot, is we do stuff that other TV shows have done, like TV show tropes. And we say, what's our version of it? So that's kind of where we start. We start with the overall episode structure. And then we go to what we call the Act 2 videos, because they're usually occurring in Act 2. And those are the sketches that we do, the fake movie trailers, where we'll leave the studio and something strange will happen outside. The fake reality television shows that I host. We're usually writing those as the second thing we do in a season. And then towards the very, very end, and we have to save this till the end because we can't book the show that far in advance, but a couple of days before we shoot it, usually a guest star will land and we'll officially have them booked. So for instance, this season with Kevin Bacon, I think we got his official date maybe three days before he appeared on the show. And at that point, the writers and I sit down and we say, okay, what do we want to do with Kevin Bacon? And we write sketches especially for him and sort of interview style sketches. So that's usually the last thing that we do. And then we figure out then the structure of each episode and what's going to go into each episode. And we sort of compile a script, but in that script, there are pages blank because a lot of it is improv as well.
Yeah, definitely. And what do you think, what guests have you been the most excited to come on the show?
I'm really excited when, or at least I feel relaxed when it's a comedian, especially a comedian that I'm friends with, for instance. So if Fred Armisen comes on the show, I've known Fred now for 16 years. We have a relationship. I know he's going to be really funny. He's not going to be worried about how am I going to come across on camera? It's just going to be a fun time. So I sort of relax when we're doing the show, when someone like that is on. But then early on into the 2nd season, when we were making so many episodes, we realized that, I need to have people on that I've never met before, and people who are not comedians, because there's just not enough comedians in the world. So we started having people on, and it opened up the show, and it became really fun to have people like, for instance, an episode that just aired the other night was T-Pain, the musician T-Pain. Not known for comedy, but came on and was so happy to be there and so willing to just dive into anything that we wanted to do. Lil Jon, the another hip hop guy, was a lot like that as well. Or say Joe Jonas, who's on the show this week. The thing those three people had in common was they came with just a willingness to play and a sense of that they would do anything that we asked them to do. And that's what's really fun about the show, is seeing someone like T-Pain or Joe Jonas or Carly Rae Jepsen doing something that they normally wouldn't do, and being in this really weird talk show and doing comedy sketches that they're never going to do in any other show. I think it's a really unique experience for them. Or Tegan and Sarah, they're another group that was on last week. You're never going to see Tegan and Sarah do comedy sketches like they did on our show. They're just not asked to do it. At best, on a talk show, they'll be asked to play a song and maybe talk to the host for 45 seconds. But they get to sit down and do sketches and be interviewed and, act. And it's really a unique experience to watch people like that and celebrities who are not known for doing comedy on the show.
How much of the interviews are improv and how much is sort of planned?
Well, we start off every interview with I would say 20 to 30 minute improv interview. So, and when I say improv interview, that means they literally don't know the questions, which is different than most talk shows, because most talk shows nowadays, the questions are gone over at length beforehand. I've done talk shows where I've had 3 pre-interviews where the producer talks to me and says, and we really map out exactly everything that's going to be said. I never tell the guests what any of my questions are. I usually just say, hey, the general idea of this is, if I ask you a question, the answer is yes. So if I say, to Stephen Yeun of The Walking Dead, how much of the show is improv? Is it 100%? And he says, no, we don't improv the show. That would be ridiculous. 0%. I mean, it's obviously scripted. Well, then the scene is over and we're never going to use it. But if he says, 100% of The Walking Dead is improv. I, in fact, improved, when I got bit by a zombie, that's that leads to comedy, So we do about 20 to 30 minutes of that with each guest. And then we do pre-written comedy bits. So, in the show, it ends up being, I would say maybe 1/3 improv and 2/3 written.
And just so people watching this know, we have not had any practice interviews. You don't know the questions that are coming right now.
We haven't done this at all. You're a real interviewer.
Oh, well, thanks, Scott. But what has it been a moment on the show that surprised you the most?
It's interesting because every day that we're shooting the stuff that's not written already, the narrative stuff, it really is a day that I don't know what's going to happen, and a day where anything can happen. And we've had experiences where things have gone wrong and things don't go the way that we want them to. So, I mean, I'm constantly surprised, but the great thing about the show is I'm usually pleasantly surprised, if that makes sense. There have only been a few days here and there where I've been surprised by, oh, wow, that person's a jerk. And it's usually not someone sitting on the couch. It's usually, an actor we've hired who's being a diva. I'm usually just pleasantly surprised at how much fun it is. We have an episode coming up with Allison Janney from your favorite show, The West Wing.
Yeah.
And we had never met before, and I had no idea if she was going to think it was stupid or whether she was going to get into it. And there's always that nervousness in the pit of my stomach of how is this going to go? Are they going to think this is stupid? And I'm just usually pleasantly surprised. She sat down on the couch and was having so much fun. And halfway through, she looked out and said, I feel like I'm high right now. What is happening? It's just like a really unique experience. And I feel like everyone that I do the show with, we're sort of like bonded in a way of we've had a really weird showbiz experience doing this show together.
you say like quite often like something might go wrong or whatever, and like what can you think of an example where something's gone wrong, and because it's gone wrong, it sort of forced you to think of some creative solution?
Sure. I mean, generally, like I was saying, you want the guests to say yes to your stupid questions. So what can go wrong is if someone comes out and shuts you down all the time and says, I ask a question, say, did you have a tricycle when you were a kid? And nope, I didn't. And then the whole interview becomes like that. And it sort of becomes a challenge then to break through that and try to figure out a way to make it funny. And, luckily this show came from the podcast, and I've done at this point 430 episodes of the podcast, along with a million live ones. I have a lot of experience dealing with people who either don't want to talk or find the situation to be weird and unpleasant. So I have a lot of experience kind of dealing with that, and one of my heroes was David Letterman. And he was the king of that, of taking Madonna not wanting to talk and turning it into comedic gold. So, I mean, that is the real challenge and the reason to do improv, and the reason to make these interviews improv for me is to get that real moment with people. If it were just a scripted interview, I think people could really tell, but there's just something about the reality of seeing, for instance, I just was editing together the Kaylee Cuoco episode from The Big Bang Theory, and there's just something really unique about seeing her crack up genuinely on the show because some improv has gone really weirdly that you don't get on any other show.
Mm. Do you think what's been your favorite guest of all the seasons on the show?
I think the one that was the most meaningful to me personally was definitely Pee Wee Herman. Mm-hmm. I've been a big fan ever since I saw him on the David Letterman show back in 1985, and I went to go see Pee Wee's Big Adventure on opening night. I was such a fan, and the groundwork for that was laid in the podcast where I interviewed him for the podcast, and that was the only time I'd ever met him. And we had a really good interview. And so I was thinking, God, I would really love to have him on the show, but why would he do it? I mean, our show is influenced by him, certainly. So, it's like Johnny Carson appearing on the David Letterman show. It was that meaningful to me to have, one of the big influencers to sit down and actually do the show. And he didn't just do the show. Someone of his stature probably could have sort of big timed us and said, I'll come for an hour, and I'll kind of do my thing and you shoot around it. He did the whole experience. I mean, when we shoot with these actors on the couch, a lot of people don't know, we shoot for probably 6 hours at least. He did the whole thing, and he wrote brand new Pee Wee bits that he's never done before and has never done since on the show. And it was just really meaningful to me to have him sort of endorse the show and acknowledge that we were influenced by him, and to say, hey, I think your show is funny and I want to be on it. It was really great.
Mm. And do you think, it's interesting with your, you said Letterman was sort of a big sort of influence of you as well. What's it like hosting sort of a talk show of sorts in a world post David Letterman?
It's interesting because when we started the show, I kind of was viewing it as just sort of my Letterman type show. This is what I would do if I had a talk show. Mm. The first season is sort of like that, where it's a little more like a straight down the middle talk show, doing talk show style bits. The only difference being we don't have an audience, we don't have a band, and it's edited. So that's sort of where it started. But it's very interesting trying to do comedy post Letterman to me, because obviously David Letterman was influenced by Steve Allen. A lot of bits that he did on the early David Letterman show, Late Night, were just directly ripped off from the Steve Allen Tonight Show. So everyone kind of takes their influences and does what they can with them. What was interesting to me is trying to do a talk show post all talk shows. The talk show for me, it's hard to watch nowadays. I used to watch David Letterman because it was like a comedy delivery system for me. I loved his point of view, and I loved the fact that I could watch his show, and there was like a lot of written comedy and a lot of his personality injected into everything. Talk shows lately, they're kind of celebrity delivery systems now. So for me, I just really wanted to do a show that harkened back to the early days of late night David Letterman, which was a comedy delivery system. And I wanted to strip away all of the things that I felt were getting in the way of delivering the comedy. So for me, when you see the audience, and you hear the audience laughing, the audience laughter on a typical 1 hour show takes up 25 minutes of it, I would think, and I wanted to get rid of that. And I wanted to just have those 25 minutes be jokes. And so it really was a system where I was like taking a look at everything post Letterman, post Carson, post everybody, and just saying, what can I take away from this that's going to get in the way of an audience hearing jokes? And that's really what we tried to do.
And at the Emmy Awards, you compete in the variety sketch category now, not the variety talk show category. And like you are such this interesting mix of talk and sketch. Did you guys like think about which was the best category to go in, or?
It was interesting because I wrote an article about this topic, about splitting up the categories into talk and into variety, which caused them to take a look at it and actually do it. And they consulted with me about it, about, whether it would be a good idea or not, and I advocated for it. Really, because I think that shows like ours, we're getting the short shrift in the Emmys, because there are so many major talk shows that are just that. They're just talk shows. You have Colbert, and you have Fallon and Seth Meyers, and those are like powerhouses that, because they're on major networks, they're going to get a lot of votes, and they're always going to be in there nominated. And little tiny comedy shows that are more sketch shows, they would get just left by the wayside. And I think I presented some evidence to them that like there hadn't been a non-talk show nominated in that category for 10 years. I think it had been the same shows. So for me, I think splitting it up into two different categories is about shining a light on the smaller shows of the world that don't get as much attention. And so that's why for me, our show is kind of, it's a sketch show that looks like a talk show, but it really is an alternative sketch show.
Yeah.
And it's not meant to compete against those like big mammoth powerhouses. It's meant to be in the kind of weirder category. And that's why we're in that one.
Yeah, and it is such a weird category in one sense. This is one of the weirdest categories of the Emmys. We got Charlotte Yours, and you mentioned Fred Armisen earlier. You got Portlandia in there, which is such a wonderfully like quirky and weird show in its own right and stuff like that. So yeah, so it's
a show that I'm producing, Bajillion Dollar Properties. That's actually a sketch show, and we were trying to submit it into that category, and something about the rules, they wouldn't let it be in that category when it's a total sketch show. So it's, it's like a case-by-case basis. They sort of...
What was wrong with it?
I think one of the rules was that even though each scene in it was like a sketch to us, because they had characters were in, they sort of recurred throughout the season because they had recurring characters and cast members in it, they decided it wasn't eligible. So, it's too bad, because that is a real sketch show, and it shouldn't have to compete against like Modern Family, which is a sitcom,
Oh yeah. Yeah, no, for sure. And with the Emmys, you actually wrote the Emmys last year for Andy Samberg. What was it like being a part of that whole side of the Emmy Awards?
It was interesting. Last year I had a real kind of Emmy year where I hosted the local Emmys, which is basically newscasts. I presented at another Emmys show. I presented at the at the Creative Arts, maybe. I won a Creative Arts Emmy, or I won for Between Two Ferns.
Yeah.
And then I wrote for the actual, Emmy proper show. So I felt like I just had Emmys all summer last year that I couldn't get away from them. It was really interesting. I mean, it was very cool. Andy Samberg wanted myself and my executive producer of Comedy Bang Bang, Neil Campbell, to write on the awards because we had worked with him on the MTV Awards that he had hosted a few years back. And he loves Comedy Bang Bang. It's one of his favorite television shows. He's appeared on it, I think, 4 or 5 times. So what was interesting about it to me was we were going to have to postpone our season, or at least shooting the season, in order to accommodate the Emmys. And so I said to Andy, I really want to do it, but it means shifting our entire filming schedule. I really can't do it unless all of my writers who are supposed to be working those months can write on the Emmys as well, because it's just not fair to them to have to take 3 months off because I want to go do the Emmys. And to his credit, he said, yeah, let's make your entire staff the staff of the Emmys. And so that's what it was. It was just the Comedy Bang Bang writers. And it was great because a lot of times when you're doing these award shows, it's a hodgepodge of a lot of different people with different influences. And we've all worked together for now years. Andy loves our sense of humor, and it really did become like a family thing where it was like a fun little sidebar for our writers to do for a couple of months. And it really made the Emmys consistent, I think. I think it was a really good telecast.
Yeah, no, I think I was. It was my first Emmys, Scott. I was at the Emmys, and it was great.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Oh, you were there?
Yes.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, it was fun. So
cool.
I guess we're thinking about the show. Like, who's a guest? What's something you'd like to do on the show that you haven't done yet? Like, what's on the wish list?
Well, definitely the wish list. I mention him all the time. David Letterman, would love to do something with him. These, by the way, are wishes that are not going to come true.
He's very much the white whale, I would like.
Yeah, I think he's someone that anyone would want on their show. So, the challenge for me in doing the show is really, like I said, what haven't we done before? When I was working on Mr. Show back in the 90s, the HBO comedy series, that was really important to us. It was coming from sort of a culture where we didn't want to do what SNL did, which was repeating ideas and characters all the time. So we repeated, I think, the character Ronnie Dobbs twice, and the characters 3 times 1 minus 1 3 times. And that was the extent of any repeating characters, I believe. Maybe Droopy twice. So Comedy Bang Bang, I had a very similar sort of sensibility about that. We would repeat structures of sketches a lot, but really it became a show where every episode you never knew what we were going to do. We would do an upside down episode.
Yeah. You still there, Scott?
We would do a musical episode. We would do an episode where we would get time travel back into the 60s with Josh Groban and do a black and white episode. So it really becomes, for me, what haven't we done before? This season, we had our 100th episode. So it became, okay, what have other shows done with their 100th episode, and what can we do with ours, and what's different about it? And that's really the challenge of the show for me, is keeping it fresh. And that's kind of what makes it a sketch show, honestly, is, you're not going to see that with normal talk shows. At best, they'll do a crazy idea like Conan's Claymation episode once a year, maybe. Every single one of our episodes is a totally different weird idea that we're doing. We just did a medieval episode where we travel back in time to Camelot last week. So that's kind of, for me, the challenge of keeping the show going is like, what haven't we done? And that's what I'm always kind of like looking for. And when we talk to the writers at the beginning of the season, that's always like, what haven't we done? And honestly, that's one reason why I was kind of excited about like Reggie Watts leaving the show. Not that I was excited about it at all, but the fact that I got to do an episode that said goodbye to a cast member. That's like TV shows get to do that all the time. And we had not gotten to do that. And it was really exciting to figure that out. And then similarly, when our new band leader, Kid Cudi, started, it was like we got to do an episode where we replaced someone and had to deal with that. Almost like, Woody replacing Coach, So that was fun for me. And so getting to do all those kind of new things that shows get to do, it has been really one of the great joys, because our show is like a show that loves TV. I love TV. I've grown up with it. So to get to do, cast replacements and 100th episodes, all that stuff is so cool to me that it's really figuring that out, and the reason that I enjoy keeping on doing the show.
Have any zoo animals ever let loose on the set?
Let loose? Well, I will say that there was a donkey that we had. There's a line in the budget for animal wranglers and live animals that our producer keeps trying to get me to take out of the budget. And then just things happen where, you'll get a donkey and you'll need to have a donkey on the set and he won't do what you want him to do, So that happens actually more than you would think. I would say dogs are really difficult to deal with. We've had dogs just not doing even my own dog. I have my own dog on the show, and we had to cut him out of the episode. We did a Hitchcock Rear Window type episode where he was in a basket being lowered, much like the dog in Rear Window, and he just wouldn't do it. So I would say the donkey was the most stubborn thing that we've ever had to deal with.
Has anything ever caught on fire?
Well, okay, there is one episode where, and my wife watches this episode and she gets really, really mad, where I was supposed to light a bag of money on fire. And I got to the set, and our director, I spoke to him and I said, "Oh, okay, how are we doing this? Is this a special effect, or how are we doing this? I don't see any fire people around." And he goes, "Oh, well, we dipped the bag in kerosene and you're just going to put a lighter up to it and light it." And I said, "Oh, okay." That was surprising to me. And it's a cool shot. I light this bag of money on fire, and it goes up so quickly and just engulfs practically my whole hand with fire. And the people who are in the shot with me, you can see it in their eyes. They're really frightened, but they're trying to smile through it because we all were supposed to be smiling like, "Yay, we're lighting money on fire." And all of their faces are like, "Eh." And I throw it into the trash can, and it didn't burn me at all. But every time I watch it, I go, "That was so dangerous. What are we doing?" And it really makes my wife angry to watch.
Well, Scott, you did very well. I tried to throw a few questions out to see if you would say no, but you had good stories.
I said yes to each one.
Well, sorry, yeah.
I said yes and had somewhat of a story for each one.
Yeah, very good. Thanks so much, Scott. Thanks for talking to us about Comedy Bang Bang. Comedy Bang Bang. All the best for the Emmys and for the seasons moving on forward and stuff like that.
Thanks so much. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, no, I did too.
Cool. Well, thanks, dude.
Yeah, so